Hello, podcast listener. This is your host with the most, and we're going to be talking with Mike Murphy today. Now, this episode lovingly goes everywhere. We're going to talk about his adventures, how he went from being a cigarette spokesman mascot all the way to working in an ER during easily one of the most incredible medical years in human history. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of JJ Meets World with Mike Murphy. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
Mike Murphy, welcome to JJ Meets World.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
What do you go by?
Most people call me Murph.
Murph?
Yeah.
Do you ever get people talking about Murph and the Magic Tones from Blues Brothers?
From the Blues Brothers, sure.
Yeah. I love that. He's like, look at these red shag speakers that I had ordered. So Mike, I got to meet you for the first time like an hour ago, and we've been chatting, and it turns out I have a lot of East Coast family that you mentioned Ocean City, Maryland at one point. And I'm like, yeah, I've been to that tourist trap before. But it's what I find unique about the East Coast and like the Midwest is we have the same idea when it comes to cities that are vacation cities. So like in our area, if you go down to Detroit Lakes during the summer, it's got a population of like 100,000 people, but during the dead of winter, there's like 5,000. Right. And it's the same way for a lot of these like communities in your neck of the woods on the East Coast that just swell with people because they've got vacation homes.
Right. Yeah. And especially on the weekend. I mean, Maryland's got that unique geography. If you want to get to where I live, you have to go over this huge bridge from DC or Baltimore, and there'll be like a 5-hour backup on Fridays coming over. And on Sunday, it's a 5-hour backup going back. And Ocean City is like becomes a population of almost 500,000 people on the weekends.
You ever put your car on a ferry? Have you ever done one of those like gone one places?
There's a ferry between Delaware and New Jersey that we do, but we don't usually do the car.
I would be terrified to drive because I see this in it's Stephen King books, right? Because maybe it's more of a Maine thing, but I see in movies and television where people drive their car onto the ferry. Yeah. Be like, I'd be terrified.
No thanks.
Yeah, right.
No, thank you.
It's not going to happen. I also find that ferries are one of the places where I feel like we've done the least amount of creative advertising. You've got a captive audience for the 45 minutes it takes for you to get across this bay. But what are you getting? At most, like there's a little coffee shop where you can buy a $3, cup of black coffee. But why aren't we using that as a time for being like, all right, everyone, listen to this Tupperware pitch. You can't go anywhere. We've got you. I feel like we're really missing that opportunity. So you are a friend of frequent guest Kevin Kennedy. And where'd you meet Kevin?
We were college roommates.
And what college was that?
We went to Notre Dame.
See, now he would have immediately said, I went to Notre Dame, and that's where I met Mike Murphy. But you were so humble and nice in that. I had to get you to say that. Yeah,
it's funny because there is a joke, and my nephew tells it to me all the time. How do you know somebody went to Notre Dame? Just wait a minute, and they'll tell you. So, it's like, I like literally take that to heart and think, I'm not going to lead with that. That's really annoying. People, we went to Notre Dame.
But now, listener, I will mention that he is just casually wearing a Notre Dame hat. He just so like it's not like it's not happening or anything. How do you end up at Notre Dame?
When I was a kid, I always wanted to go there. I think Kevin was the same way. It's like one of those things you grow up Irish Catholic, and it's like, where are you going to go to college? I'm going to go to Notre Dame. And it's funny, when I was a kid, I don't know if I've ever told you this story, Kev. I thought Notre Dame was in California.
Oh, really?
And then as I got older, I was like, I'm applying, and it's like, why am I mailing this to Indiana? Why am I mailing my application to Indiana? Oh, it's in Indiana. Okay, well, that'll be fine. And then you get there and go, wow, this is the opposite of California.
So is Notre Dame like how I imagine, where it's brick buildings covered in ivy and
Very much.
and people like who've been to every single football game for the last 40 years? And,
Yes.
Yeah.
Very picturesque campus, sort of dropped into the middle of this industrial town in the Midwest. And very much everybody comes back for every game, and they wear their plaid pants and they have their tailgates, and as you'd imagine.
I always think that's so interesting that people, like I have a brother-in-law who is a diehard fan of the Bison, the North Dakota State University Bison, and he'll go tailgate, and he's got, a Bison flag that's right below the American flag, and he's got all this stuff. And I always think, like, you had that much fun in college that you want to continue sport. And he's like, absolutely.
Right.
Like, I feel like it's a community that I get to be a part of and I'll remain a part of.
Yeah, and that's very strong at Notre Dame. I mean, people come back. There are guys that tell you how many games they've been to, how many games in a row, how many even home and away games. That's a big deal.
So what'd you go to college for?
Like to major? Or?
Yeah. Like, what'd you study?
Well, I started off pre-med, and then I ended up switching to Soviet studies at the time, and then
Did you?
As you do, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
Well, so it's
What year are we talking
medicine
about?
is always
In the
losing
80s.
students
In
to
the
Soviet
80s.
studies.
well. So look at Notre Dame. The big thing, you go to Notre Dame and you're like, I want to be a doctor, and Notre Dame's got this great pre-med program, and they put everybody in med school. And I was a sophomore, and you take all these pre-med classes, and there was this lady. I can use her name. She's probably dead. Her last name was Hunt, Linda Hunt, and she was a biology professor. And she was about 5'2" and weighed about 200 pounds.
Okay,
And
so
she-
not Linda Hunt, who is the principal in Kindergarten Cop.
no,
Okay,
different Linda
not
Hunt.
that Linda
So
Hunt.
she comes out in this big auditorium where everybody's taking biology, and she comes out and she has this really nasally voice. And she comes out and goes, "How many of you are going to go to medical school?" And about 2/3 of the class raises their hand, and she goes, "I'm here to make sure that half of you don't even apply." So the first biology test I took in college, I got a 12 out of 100.
Oh my God!
And I said to my buddy, "Well, I'm part of that half. I'm out of here." So
Soviet studies for me.
yeah, right. So I started doing like politics.
what was her? I guess what was her name? Right? What was the girl who was studying Soviet studies that you followed?
There weren't any beautiful women in that department.
No,
either.
there wasn't.
Yeah,
No, that's too bad.
But they had this really famous guy that was he was a Soviet specialist at Notre Dame, and so I took one of his classes and I loved it. So I took another one, and so I majored in politics, I guess, and you had to pick a specialty within that. And so I took a bunch of this guy's classes, and then senior year I ended up writing a thesis with him, and so I ended up having this degree from Notre Dame in theater and Soviet studies.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
That's
both of which are
okay. So you get something like that. I mean, in the 80s,
Yeah, so
to
it's a
boot,
big
like
deal.
I mean, that's huge,
So, like,
right?
Yeah. And then the year after I graduate college, the Berlin Wall comes down, and the Soviet Union is no longer in existence. It's like, well, that's a good, it's a history degree now, I guess.
Right. I mean, do you ever call it like, I got a degree in Russian studies? Be like, no, but you studied the Soviet
So
Union.
Soviet Union, and it doesn't exist anymore.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
That'd be like it'd be like the person back in the day who studied like outhouse construction, right? And they were like, I am a master builder of outhouses. And they're like, we've discovered indoor plumbing.
Man, yeah. It's kind of like
Maybe
that.
it comes back. Maybe the
Well,
Soviet
you
Union
know,
comes
Putin
back.
Putin is very Soviet throwback. I mean,
Very much so.
yeah.
So when you watch like a
He's also very
James,
sick, though, isn't he?
Putin?
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware
I
of.
thought he had MS or something. That
Ah,
he has some
no,
kind of
I-
debilitate because he's slowly stepping down over the next couple of years.
I had not heard that.
Okay.
He's like the guy who wears no shirt and rides a
Right,
bear kind
right,
of thing.
the
right,
man's
and plays
man.
hockey and
Yeah.
scores like 50 goals,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Amazingly how that happens.
Well, and it's interesting too, like with the state of our nation right now and our relationship with Russia. It must be kind of, you must have all these anecdotes, be able to be the guy who's at Starbucks, be like, well, actually where this like tension comes from, right? And then you'd be able to point that out. And they're like, sir, would you please order something or leave?
Do you want milk in the coffee or not? Yeah. Yeah.
And then it'd be like, the Russian word for milk is. So I have two cousins who are adopted from Russia.
Okay.
And so it involved like, not that I'm xenophobic or anything like that, but I just didn't. My knowledge of Russia basically came from James Bond movies, right? You know that, and then I know that the Icelanders are bad because of Mighty Ducks 2, and like that's my frame of knowledge for a lot of this. But so my aunt and uncle adopt these 2 Russian girls who are best friends in an orphanage 2 years apart. And I learned more about what goes on in the lower class. Like this is the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. But I was like, my God, you know, they kick these kids out of these orphanages and then you become prostitution is like your only possible job. And one of them had a brother who froze to death in a forest because they thought that he was probably trying to walk to a mining town.
Now, were the kids they adopted, were they Caucasian or were they more of the Mongolian?
They were Caucasian.
Okay.
Yeah. So
one of my partners, when I like first started this job I'm working at now, she wanted to adopt a Russian kid. So she flies to Russia and her husband, they were both doctors, and the husband's a cardiologist and she works in the ER, and they fly to Russia. She's like, I got to take 2 weeks off. I'm going to go pick up a kid. So she goes over there, and like a week later, the husband's home. And I said, where's Kathy? Well, she had to stay some extra time. What happened? Well, we're bringing home a second kid. Like the orphanage said, if you want the one, you got to take 2. And she's like, I don't have room for 2. And they said, well, then you can't have the one. And they ended up being brothers and sisters, and she couldn't leave them and brought them back.
That's amazing. So the 2 girls that my aunt and uncle adopted were best friends who became sisters. And so they adopted one. And then throughout the year, they realized like, well, this other little girl is really important to your life and we should adopt her. And they said, what's amazing is when you go to do something like an adoption, even though everything's on the board, you still have to bring bribery money. Like it's rude not to bribe officials in this case.
Yeah, these guys have stories like that too, where it's like every turn, it's like, wait, you only came for, like they told them they had to take 2, and then they go to the official and they're like, you're only allowed to take 1, but they said I have to take 2. And the kind of that look of, it could probably be papered over with a little bit of cash.
Right, yeah. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you do now?
I'm an emergency physician.
Okay, so how do you go from theater and Russian studies to...
Yeah, it's
you know, like...
Didn't you leave medicine? Didn't they try to not get you to be in medicine?
So Notre Dame was very good.
Didn't you get a 12 out of 100 on your biology test?
So it's funny how it works. Like when you're not paying for the classes that you're taking, how little you'll study. And then when you go back and your dad's like, good luck with that if you want to go back to school. And then you start paying for it, you study a little bit more. Yeah, so I enjoyed it. I did other stuff. Like I've done kind of all kinds of jobs. I mean, if we sat here and talked about it, like I went to Europe for a year. I lived in Alaska. I ended up, I was Camel Joe in the 90s. Like I worked for RJ Reynolds.
Really?
Yeah. I dressed up, I had a job with RJ Reynolds, and my job was in DC. We would go to the bars. I would dress up as Camel Joe, and I had 3 women, one of who's a friend of ours from college, that dressed like, remember the women that were in the Robert Palmer videos? With the little slinky black dresses?
Like the red lipstick. And
they dressed up like that, slick back hair, and I was Camel Joe, and we'd give out free cigarettes. So it was...
Okay. So hold on. Let's not gloss over. We got a lot more to talk about before we get there, but we'll get to that.
So basically what you're saying is like if the 1980s had just continued and just stayed the 1980s, you would have been doing real good right now.
You and Spuds McKenzie would have been best friends at one point.
Free cigarettes, the Soviet Union.
Yeah. So tell me about how you give away free cigarettes. Are you like, is it a whole pack? Is it like a promotional pack of only 3?
The whole packs. It was really like when I think back on it, and I'll tell you why I ended up quitting that job if we get to it, but it was, we would go into these bars, and there are areas near where the military were. So a lot of military guys. And the women literally would dress like this women in the Robert Palmer video. They would have like the old style cigarette vending.
Oh, like cigars, cigarettes.
Correct. Exactly. But instead of saying, would you like to buy them? They would literally just take them, and guys would come up and they would just, here's a pack of Camels. Here's a pack of, whatever.
Smoking's so sexy. Yeah. Oh, yeah, give me 2 of them. Give me 2. I'll smoke 2 at once.
And so we would go bar to bar, and there would be Camel Joe time. And
what does the Camel Joe outfit that you're wearing look like?
I mean, I was a mascot.
Yeah. So
I had a white coat, black jacket, and then the head, and then big glove, like Mickey Mouse gloves. So I would be Camel Joe. And we had to have a guy, because people would try to take inappropriate pictures. There were no cell phones, obviously, but people had cameras, or they would try to like take pictures of them grabbing my crotch or grabbing my butt or whatever.
Really?
Yeah. And so they had to have people that would sort of be security that they couldn't take inappropriate pictures of Camel Joe. And at the time,
Yeah, we don't want our brand associated with something like humping. We just want to be good, clean cigarettes.
clean tobacco and cancer. Camel Joe was more famous than Mickey Mouse. In the early
I believe
90s.
that.
Yeah. I mean, they really had to.
I remember hearing that as a factoid during DARE in school all the time. Yeah.
He was, and I felt, so the back of my car, the trunk of my car was filled with Camel Joe t-shirts, Camel cigarettes, and it was RGR Nabisco. So then you'd have Oreo cookies and like all these crackers and stuff. And we were giving all kinds of stuff away.
Oh, that's interesting.
So,
and I bet you were busy nonstop. I bet they had tons of places for you to go.
Like Wednesday to Sunday. Did
you ever get somebody who approached you and be like, "You're killing America"?
Not a single person.
Wow.
It was crazy. But it was, so I ended up quitting that job because we were like, one of the executives came up from North Carolina and real heavy in marketing. And we're at an after event where we're sitting, just having a cup of coffee and sort of talking about the night, how to go. And one of the girls pulled out cigarettes from, I don't know, like Winston. This guy went crazy and was like, "Give me those cigarettes. You smoke Camel cigarettes, you smoke RJ Reynolds cigarettes." And he's like tearing her cigarettes up. "We got to get more people smoking these cigarettes. We're giving these things away for free." And something kind of clicked in my head where I was like, we're like giving crack to these guys. Like, this is not good. And I never made a phone call. I never gave him my notice. I just never went back.
Kept a trunk full of Nabisco prunks.
Well, I threw the cigarettes away, but I kept the t-shirts and the Oreos.
It's amazing to me because like the cigarette, so I was a huge fan of the show Mad Men, and that's a huge, cigarette advertising is a huge part of, because they were at the time when the Surgeon General finally puts warnings and starts limiting advertising. And it's amazing to me how like the cigarette industry, like every single time a roadblock's put up, they're like, "Don't worry, we invented jetpacks, so we're going to get over this in this way."
Yeah.
And it is, so they went from having, you'd never see that today, right? You'd never see a bar where a mascot is there where they're handing out free cigarettes. What you would see is they get to set up a booth at some kind of music festival, and the booth is crowded because they're giving away free cigarettes and t-shirts and stuff like that.
Well, a lot of areas, the city of DC was one, and the state of Maryland too, they made it illegal to give away cigarettes for free. Can't give away free cigarettes.
Oh, interesting.
Because they were, they realized it's like, we'll give you this first pack is free.
I think there's something amazing. I was reading an article about how like the mental math that goes behind how many cigarettes are in a pack, because it's something like the average cigarette smoker actually smokes like one or two more cigarettes than are in a pack, so that they're buying more than one at a time.
Sure.
And the fact that like you can't buy like a half sleeve of cigarettes, right? And it's illegal to sell loosies, those single cigarettes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it fascinates me. Both my parents smoked Camel when I was a kid, and then they changed their brand like in the early 2000s, right before my dad died of cancer. So isn't that great?
Yeah.
But I remember asking them at one point, be like, "Why did you change brands?" And they said, "Availability. This one's available more than this one is." And I thought to myself, like, right. Isn't that just bizarre? Yeah. But like, I feel like brand loyalty, cigarettes and soft drinks, people are brand loyal and they won't say no to something they don't want. Like, or I guess, let me put it this way. If you go and say, "Could I get a Coke?" And they're like, "We only have Pepsi." You go, "Yeah, that's fine."
Right.
And so if you say, "Can I bum a cigarette?" and someone's like, "Oh, I smoke Checkers," you're like, "Oh, yeah, that's fine." Because you want it.
Got a Virginia Slim for you. It's like,
Did you smoke?
No.
Oh, that's even more fascinating to me.
My parents both smoked, and my dad, I actually never saw my dad smoke, but I guess he at one point was smoking like 2 packs a day, and one day just quit. And my mom quit when I was a kid, but man, it grossed me out so much when I was a kid. But there's still, my brothers and I talk about this, that anymore it's kind of hard to smell cigarette smoke, but when I smell it, I'm kind of like, "Oh, Mom."
Yeah, right.
Like,
there's a nostalgic smell.
That
yep.
smell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you're in it too much, you don't like it. But when you get that little whiff of cigarette smoke, it's like, oh, reminds you of your childhood.
That's what cigar smoke does for me with my grandfather and my mom's side, because he was a cigar smoker, but he was the kind who he would work on a cigar throughout the week, right? So he would only be really smoking at the end of the day with a little bit of scotch. He'd smoke a little bit, put it out, and sit it next to him. And so there was always this little waft of cigar smoke, but it was never overpowering. Mm-hmm. It was never like smoky. Yeah, it was never excessive, never super smoky. And so that's why, even though I don't like cigarettes, I do like cigars because of that nostalgic
little
connection.
olfactory connection there. Yeah, there's something to it.
I never smell cigarette smoke anymore unless I go to like Las Vegas. And then it's like, boy, oh boy, this is where all the cigarette smokers ended up, was down in Las Vegas. I do think though that trust me, I am as anti-smoking as it comes, but I think there's something that I missed out on by not being a smoker when it comes to like connecting with other business professionals, because there's a weird thing where if you're a smoker, you're part of that community. And so you instantly have your icebreaker of like when you go out to have a cigarette break.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can, you meet other people just randomly. You're like, oh, can I borrow a lighter? Yeah. Like, oh, I work up at, Benson and Benson upstairs, and like, oh yeah. I work at such. Oh yeah. How are tire sales going? Like, oh, they're great. And before you know it, you've got a new client because you're part of that fraternity, right? Yeah. And so I always thought like, oh, maybe I should take up smoking just for this.
You missed out on other things too, like the cancer part.
Right.
And emphysema. Yeah.
Oh God, I miss all those things. Yeah, right. Yeah. I imagine there's a good number of smokers from this last year of the pandemic who are saying like, see, your guys' lungs are going to be scarred anyway. And you didn't get to enjoy the smooth, fresh flavor of Camel Ultralights. Okay. So then you're in Alaska as well.
I was there for like a summer.
Yeah, what'd you do in Alaska though?
Cut fish.
Cut fish. So you were cleaning them and stuff like that?
Yeah, I was at a resort, and I just sort of went up there, and I met this guy who was I took a tent thinking, oh, I'll just live up in Alaska, and I got this job at a resort, and there was a guy already living there and had strung a tarp up, and so I had this huge campsite, and so we just lived on the resort property,
really,
and spent the summer sort of cutting fish and hanging out.
That's awesome. And so what kind of people were coming to this resort? Were they people who were coming up for okay.
Yeah,
so it was a swanky place.
It was a swanky place. So it was great because you got good tips, and my costs were zero, so it was a great place to be for the summer.
What was it like just to get up there? Did you fly up there? Did you take a VW bus?
I flew to Seattle, and then I took a ferry. There's like a little ferry.
See, that goes up everything comes back to ferry stock and this,
Yeah.
Always riding on ferries. So, and why Alaska? I mean, you just had a buddy
I just wanted to go.
Really?
Yeah. I just thought that would be fun.
So I used to, when I was in high school, when I was at the school that Kevin teaches at now, one of my jobs in our improv club was I arranged to have the t-shirts made every year. So our uniform t-shirts for shows. And so I'm a high school kid. What do I know about it? And so someone's like, oh, this is where the basketball team goes to get their jerseys. Why don't you go to this place? So I go down to there, and the person who's helping me says, oh, my brother owns this business, but I'm one of their salesmen. Let me help you. His name is Chuck Stensgaard. Amazing salesman, even better human being. So Chuck and I start this relationship that goes for 3 years, and we're constantly checking up with each other. So 2 years after I got out of high school, I needed to get some stuff made. So I went over to my buddy Chuck Stensgaard, and I said, Chuck, I need these things. He's like, it's a good thing you got me today because I actually leave in a week. And I said, oh, what do you mean you leave? And you got another job? And he goes, no, Canada has hired me to start a town. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, they've decided that there's too big of a gap between town A and town B. And so they want a town in the middle of it. And so what they're going to do is they're going to give me capital, and they're going to pay people who want to move to this place and help establish a municipality. So essentially Canada would say, like, if you want to go and you're willing to build a house on your own and start a general store or something, we'll give you all the capital you need. You can go there and you live for free, and now you own this house. And he goes, and they chose Chuck because of like, he's been, I guess he helped like in another town somewhere. And he's like, so you'll be the mayor and we'll pay you, and you go in and essentially like you help other people get established, and you just sort of like do this thing. And so within something insane, like 5 years, it had grown to like 1,300 people. And it just was an explosion of people. And it like all of a sudden now town B is smaller than this town that they just, put in the middle of the road. And I bumped into him at a gas station years later. And I was like, well, so what was it like? He was like, it's great. It's great. I'm going to go build another town, and they're going to give me an even more remote area. And I said, why do you do this? He goes, I love adventure. He goes, it's fun to just see something unique.
That's amazing. And you wonder, it's like, was he like scrolling through, like, I don't know how long it was, but like on Facebook, is there an ad? Want to start a town in Canada? Click here.
Right. Isn't that just amazing? And when
Yeah.
you think about like Canada is it's just like the United States, right? It's this huge thing. And where we're worried about towns dying out, they're worried about like, well, God, if you can't get gas for 300 miles, no one's going to want to, take that road, and we want to be more accessible.
They're really, and you guys are much closer to Canada than I am, but my son did some work with immigrants, and they are like opening the gates and bring them in, as many people as we can get up here.
Mm-hmm.
And he went up around Winnipeg and was like on the border. And I don't know how much people appreciate this, but everybody talks about, the immigrants are coming to the U.S. and they're going to tear us apart. A lot of those people just keep right on going. Like they come through America, but they're on their way to Canada, and Canada's welcoming them with open arms.
Yeah.
Because you go back to like the 1700s, we had the same population as Canada, a few million people. And it's at one point our population exploded and theirs didn't. And they've recognized that, and they want people. They want people to come up and build these towns. They want immigrants to come into the country because they recognize, 30 million people versus 300 million people. We need a lot more people up here.
Yeah.
And they've got the space.
They do. They've got the space, and they've got the culture up there too. Like, I mean, Canada's the kind of country, like, we have the #1 flannel festival in the upper, part of the, hemisphere. You're like, oh, way to go, Canada. You did it. Like you've got it. But I love going into Canada, and it's a country that's really unique. Like, I think of like Toronto is New York City without the crime, the filth, and what seems like overcrowding.
Yeah.
So
we went to Quebec, and it's like Paris, but people are nice.
Yeah, right.
It was great.
You speaking tons of French, and
yeah, it was great.
So have you ever seen a Manitoba license plate by any chance?
No.
Okay, so Manitoba is obviously like right above us in North Dakota.
Right.
So we see them all the time because our economy in this area, I would say a third of it comes from Canadian dollars. So before the pandemic, they would come down here to shop. And, they get American products that you don't get in Canada. And it would not be uncommon to be at the Target or the mall or something like that and see 60 Manitoba license plates, right? Huge stuff. So I thought that their license plate, it's this red type that's kind of in a rainbow pattern, and then Manitoba in blue type. I thought it said, finally, Manitoba. And I was like, what a weird thing to put on the license plate, to be like, God, finally, we're in Manitoba. Like, what other province did you have to drive through where you got it? But it's not. It's friendly Manitoba.
Makes more sense.
Right, it does a lot more. Okay, so then you're in Europe for a year.
Well, so I did Europe before Alaska. So I went like...
That's backwards for most people. Most people are like, I'm going to do my.
I couldn't get into any of the overseas programs when we were students, and so there's actually a program. If you finish college and you want to go live in Europe, there's actually visas that you can get to live in England and Ireland. So I did that, and then when I came back, I was like, I don't want to go to work, so I'm going to go to Alaska. And then I came back from Alaska, and I was like, that's when I moved to DC and did the Camel Joe stuff.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Okay, and so after you've cleaned fish, you went on your European backpacking adventure, and you sold cigarettes.
Yeah.
Somehow now you get into the medical field.
So even before that, it was. So this was like in the early 90s.
God,
there was a bush.
Your poor parents, Murph. They're like, Jesus, could you just get a job?
They were anxious for years. So I got a job. I programmed computers, and this was like the Bush. There was a huge recession in the early 90s, and I put out like 70 CVs. I mean, I took the job with Camel Joe because it was the only job I could get. And then it got so bad, that's when I finally quit and was like, I'll go do something. I'll figure something out. And I ended up getting a job programming computers for a company, H. Ross Perot. Remember that guy ran for president?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, so I worked for his company.
Can I finish? Can I finish, Larry? Can I finish?
Hey, it's my turn, Larry. I worked for that company, and I feel like Mike Judge stole my life because that was like literally the line when people are like, you've been missing a lot of work lately, and I was like, I wouldn't say I've been missing it. I'm not missing. I would go to work, and Kevin and I would joke about this because in college I would get so mad at him because we'd be sitting in class and he would literally have a newspaper up, and he would be like reading the newspaper up in the middle of a lecture with like 12 people. I was like, that is so rude. Like, dude, the guy's giving a lecture. He's like, if he wants me to pay attention, he should make it more interesting. Fast forward like 10 years later, I'm working in this computer company and we'd have these company meetings and I would just be sitting there with my newspaper out. And just like 6 months into it, I was like, I want to put a gun in my mouth and kill myself. This is terrible.
You know what's interesting to me about the tech world is at one point they clearly decided like we got to change our culture because the office space was the look of a lot of tech companies. And even before that, like if you go back to like IBM's first days, like when you were working with cards and stuff like that, it wasn't fun. It was nerve wracking. And if the computer didn't do what you wanted it to do, you were the sole person who gets blamed for it. And like, there's nothing sexy or fun about working in the tech industry until like all of a sudden it kind of seemed like in the early 2000s, like Apple and Microsoft were like, we got to make this place somewhere where you want to work.
Where you want to be.
We're going to add the nap pods. We're going to get pizza coming in all the time. Because before that, it was all cubicles. Like
suits and cubicles and ties and
right. I mean,
The
could you
first thing
imagine?
I thought though was Richard Pryor in Superman 3.
yes.
That was the first thing I
Lop off
thought
that
when you
extra half
said
a cent and I'll be a billionaire.
yeah.
And so you program computer. Did you have a passion for it, or this was just the job?
It was like I put out 70 places I put my resume and they were like, yeah, we'll hire you. And then they teach you how to do it. And
What were you programming in?
C++.
Already? What year was this?
91.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
C and C++. And so
I'm trying to teach myself Python right now. So every time I hear about it.
They send you down to Texas and you take a 3-month course. And I mean, the only thing that good came from, that's where I met my wife. And we were in this class together. And
What part of Texas?
Dallas. And so you were there for 3 months and they teach you what you need to be taught. And then you come back and you dive right back into it. And it was just not anything I was interested in. And so what would end up happening is I would go to work and I would get the work done that I had to do in like 30 minutes. And then I'd sit there and play games or read the newspaper and then I would, after work, I started volunteering at a local hospital and I went to their ER and, in retrospect, the things I got to do as a volunteer in the 90s in the hospital is like, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe they let me, it's like, I'm like a candy striper here. Like I walked in on the first day volunteering at this hospital and they said, the orthopedic surgeon's in that room, go help him. And I was like, okay. And I went in and he's like, drop that medicine. I was like, what does that mean? He's like, put it in the syringe. Let's go. And he injected in this guy's, and I was like, I program computers. Like, I don't, and he's like, come on, I'll show you how to do it. Just put, so the first day I'm reducing a broken bone on this guy. And I just thought, what am I doing with this computer programming stuff? That's crazy. I don't want to do that anymore. But I didn't have the classes to go to med school and I wasn't terribly motivated to go back because I would stay at the hospital till like midnight or 1 a.m. I'd sleep late. I'd roll into work at like 10:30. And they really, at that point, didn't care as long as you worked 8 hours. And so I'd be there till like 6. And then I'd go back to the hospital. And it got to the point where my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was like, dude, go back to school. Like, because I would never talk about work, but I'm always talking about all this work stuff I was doing at the hospital.
Roughly how old are you at the time?
Early 20s.
Early 20s?
Yeah.
So it's not like you showed up and you were like, the older guy at school anyway. So you got to be among like peers.
Well, I didn't go back to, so
there's a gap.
Well, so then I was like,
He's also forgot a country.
well, so I knew I didn't want to be a computer programmer. I was 99% sure that medicine was going to be where I ended up, but I wasn't quite ready to go back to medical school. So Kev had a buddy from high school who was in Japan. And I was like, I want to go to Japan. So I wrote this guy a letter and said, hey, can I come live with you in Japan? He's like, sure, come on over. So I kind of put everything on hold for about 18 months. And we lived in Japan and I taught English. And the idea at that point in my life was I'm going to do one of two things here. I'm either going to write and do comedy or I'm going to be a doctor. I'm not sure which one, but I'm going to give writing a try. I'm going to go to Japan because this guy was over there writing like crazy. He's writing short stories. He's writing novels. Like he was.
Right. And you're like, Doogie Howser is such a quality program.
So I go over there and in 18 months, I wrote like 10 pages of the worst play that you could ever read. And I went, you know what? The writing thing's not going to work out. So I'm going to go back and I moved back to the States and then I went back to school.
Okay, so what was your bad play about? Can you talk about the 10 pages? Like,
Yeah,
what was the premise?
The premise
was it about a guy who moves to Japan to teach English?
No, it was so I told Kevin I was trying to come up with something unique, and so this was in the 90s, and the play was about a guy who got raped.
Oh,
and I like trying to figure that, and it was. I remember I sent you a couple, and you're like, "That's not working. Nope, that's not it." And then I kept kind of trying to rework it, and probably if I'd chosen a better topic, I might have gotten something more out of it. But it was
right, because you're talking about you wanted to write comedy.
Yeah,
And
it
so,
wasn't
like,
comedy.
yeah,
There was
I
nothing
don't know.
comedic there. Yeah, it didn't. Yeah.
I wrote a really great play about how much I was in love with a girl where I was one of the main characters and
Sure.
she's one of the main characters by name too. Like, and then so I told her my feelings by making her read the play.
How did that work out?
It was not
Not
good.
good,
It was
yeah.
not good.
Women
in fact,
usually
the
don't
play
like
was called
that.
In Search of Eredo, which is the Greek goddess of.
We just have the title of this episode.
Yeah, it was really good stuff. Yeah. So later on, when
Fuck,
I got
that's
into
awesome.
radio,
That's awesome.
We had a day where we just didn't prep anything, and I'm like, should we do a reading of this play? It
Oh,
was like during the morning. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was on a rock station. And so frequent guest Britta Nelson and I did a reading of it.
Was this the
And-
waitress?
Yeah.
Okay.
And like halfway through reading this thing on air, she's like, I don't know if I can remain friends with you after reading this. This
Was
is
it just were you totally
awful.
stalkerish or just
No, but it was. I
undying
mean, it was
love and devotion for this woman?
You know, Tucker and I have a friend who teaches film at a college here, and I always enjoy hearing about the student films because there's always someone who's trying to work through something in their own life as part of it. And I remember watching one that our friend allowed them to film in his house, and it was a guy who wanted to tell this beautiful girl that he was in love with her, and so he writes this short film so that he can play himself, and the girl that he wants to tell that he loves is the girl he casts in the role. And in the end, she rejects him, and like it ends. The short film ended abruptly. It was a weird thing, like almost like maybe there was supposed to be something else here that we didn't get to. So I love stuff where people are like, you know what, I tried it. You know, I found a different calling. Like it's where it's at.
Yeah, well, and it's funny, like going back to that, like Hollywood puts all these things, these romantic things where I just professed my love for the woman and she reciprocated, and most times women are like, that's really creepy.
They're like, I'm gonna change my garage code because of this.
Like no one should look at St. Elmo's Fire and be like, oh, this is how you should pursue a
Right,
woman.
right.
The way Rob Lowe does it. Like that's so never works. Even if you look like Rob Lowe, that doesn't work. Yeah. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, movies in the 80s like ruined romance for most guys our age.
Oh,
like,
100%.
you're like, 16 Candles.
I have
St. Elmo's Fire. It's
I have
like,
two buddies whose names I will not mention who are constantly kvetching to me about their luck with women. And I'm like, well, tell me what you do. And everything they do, it's like, guys, this is not
not it.
1980s, 1990s rom-com. Those that's fiction. And also you look like a potato. So, you know, get some skills.
Try
Get
something
out
different.
there. Maybe do some Tinder.
You are not Rob Lowe.
No.
I read a book that was recommended to me by a friend of ours who considers himself quite the Lothario, and it's called The Game. Anybody ever hear about this book?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I read it, and it is like, it's like, oh, every skeezy man I've ever met. Now, given the proof is in the pudding, right? Because people use these skills like negging, where you like point something negative out about a girl that should really offend her, but it makes her crave your acceptance afterwards. Being like, oh, you know, you got kind of weird knees. And so that makes her like want to flirt heavily with you so that you look at other things and so that you can compliment another attribute of her. And and I look at this and I'm like, well, I mean, it does work, but it's just, I don't know if I want that relationship that starts from one of these things.
Yeah.
But the book is like a bestseller. And you read it,
A lot of lonely dudes out
you're
there
going through the
can't get
whole thing, and
enough.
you're like, "Oh my god, this is awful! This is awful!
Yeah,
this
they
is
should
awful!"
change the name of that book to Please Touch It.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Be like, "What's your OnlyFans?"
Yeah.
Like that's what they should really call it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you're in medicine. So you get into medicine, and this is what, early '90s, mid '90s.
I got into medical school in 98. No, 96. Sorry.
Okay, so ER is one of the top-rated shows on NBC.
Absolutely.
And do you consider yourself be like when someone asks you what you do, and be like, well, do you watch Noah Wiley and and Anthony Edwards
yeah.
save people every week. That's what I do.
That's what I do. People, when Anthony Edwards is on that show, and people would say, you should do that. You look like Anthony Edwards. Like, that's not why I want to do it, but thank you. It was funny because when I started doing that volunteer stuff, it was before that show came on. And the volunteer work I did just happened to be in an emergency department. And my wife tells me, it's funny because I volunteered at that one. And then we lived in Denver for a while. And I was volunteering at their big trauma center there. And I would come home and say, I'm never working in the ER. I'm going to do something completely different. And in med school, what I really loved doing the most was delivering babies. Like, I thought that was the coolest thing ever. The first time I saw it, I was just blown away. And so I thought I would do that. And I did some research in that. And then I did a rotation in the ER when I was a fourth year. And I went, I could potentially deliver babies here and do this and do this. And I kind of have an ADHD kind of mentality. And I like to make diagnosis and see patients. But then, like, over time, like, I would do the clinics and you'd be like, wow, your blood pressure today is 120/60. Good job. It's like, how many cigarettes are you smoking today? That wasn't my thing. And I love people who do that. And I appreciate that they do. But my thing is more of the stuff that we do in the ER. So
to me, that's interesting, right? Like, I consider myself a person who thrives in chaos.
Exactly.
And I think it takes a special type of person who's going to work in an ER.
Yeah.
My God, I've had very limited ER experience in my life. I've been relatively healthy, knock on this drywall that's right next to us. But I vividly remember when I was a kid, we had a built-in bar in our basement. So I was like playing up on top of this bar and I fell off of it. And we had an old antique wicker rocking horse. And I essentially sliced myself from like ear to ear, like Joker style, right? Mm-hmm. And so we live like 4 blocks from a hospital. And so my mom comes downstairs and like the skin's peeling away. It's separated, like blood's gushing everywhere. And she's like, so she puts me in the minivan and drives me there. And I remember they had to strap me to like a little board. Mm-hmm. I think they called it a papoose. Is that what it was? Yeah. See, okay.
How old were you? Did you say? Roughly
4 or 5.
Oh, okay. Really young. Okay.
Yeah. And I remember it had, even by that standard back then, a very inappropriate cartoon of a Native American on it.
Still does.
Does it really?
It still does. Yeah.
My God.
It's crazy. You would look at that and go, the board might be old, the one that we use, but it's.
Okay, so there you go.
Papoose board.
So I vividly remember that image and getting strapped to that board, and they ended up putting essentially Band-Aids, but they stitch underneath my chin, and I have a little tiny scar underneath my chin right there. Yeah. But that was my first ER experience. Now, one thing I will say about that versus the most recent time I was in the ER is, boy, oh boy, you fill a lot more paperwork now than you did back then. Yeah. Like back then I remember my mom walking in and, she's holding a bleeding child and they brought it back and they started working and that was it. Versus now, I feel like we went in and we were like, we need to see a doctor right away. My wife wasn't feeling it. Turns out she had juvenile diabetes diagnosed at age 35. Whoa. Yeah. Very, very odd. But when we went in, they were like, okay, we'll get you a wheelchair. But before we do that, here's an iPad. Would you please fill out this 60 thing questionnaire and, give us your insurance card. Yeah. I was like, oh, okay. So that's where we are right now.
Theoretically, when you come in, if you're sick enough, you'll see a doctor.
They'll just get you in right away.
Yeah. Especially, traumas or accidents or people with bad chest pain. There's no delay. Generally, they give you the forms if they think you have time. If you're super sick or blood pressure is really low or you're unstable or potentially dying, you'll see a doctor pretty quick.
So you seem like a guy who's got great bedside manner, right? Like,
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you work, do they have like a rate your doctor type thing where people can leave a Yelp review?
Put it in the description of this episode.
I didn't think about it. It's not something I get regularly. Like I don't get emails about it.
One of our hospitals here is really relying on that. And so they'll send you the email, be like, and tell us about your experience. And
I don't understand that.
My mom had a brain hemorrhage and, caused, like a huge blood backup in her brain. She ended up passing away after that. Sorry. And we had the worst neurosurgeon ever. And so they sent me a review and I'm like, I'm going to go flame that guy out because and not that he did something that could have saved her life, but his bedside manner was horrible. Like we're in the ER waiting, like to find out what's going on. We know that she's in, brain surgery right now. And when he comes out to talk to us, he's wearing a tuxedo. So he stopped rather than coming out and talking to us, who've been sitting there like, is my mom alive or is she dead? But he finished the surgery and then went and changed into this tuxedo before he came out. And it was sort of like, guys, I got to take off. This is the situation. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. And I was like,
He didn't say he was going to go MC a show at a comedy store probably.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
He's like, I've got to sign up for a set. I've got a really great 5 minutes I do about nurses.
I got to do, but I'll be back.
It's after 6. What is he, a farmer?
Yeah. That's a great Jack
30
Donaghy
Rock
line.
line,
Yeah. But I think,
One of the best lines I've ever seen on network television was, it's after 6. What
You're
am I,
wearing
a
a tuxedo?
farmer?
It's after 6. Do you find that people are more afraid of medical diagnosis now because they can go to WebMD and already think that they are
Yeah,
dead?
and I would say, you talk about bedside manner. I mean, I think that's one of the things that, like, doing theater and having friends and not doing medicine right out. Like, most people don't realize that people that have become doctors have been total geeks since they were teenagers, and then they go to college, and then they go to med school, and then there's nothing in medical school about how to deal with people socially. Like, it's very little, because they're cramming so much science into you. You never really understand how to deal with people, how to talk to people. Like, you guys were scared. Like, you wanted him to come out and say, it's going to be okay. It's got your mom, or, it's not going to be okay.
Right.
You wanted somebody to sit
want an
there.
answer.
Right.
Yep.
Sit there, hold my hand, give me an answer. That's all I want. But most doctors don't realize that. That guy came in and said, here's what I did in the surgery. You don't want the technical stuff. You don't want to know how many clips he put into your mom's brain. You want to know, is my mom going to wake up? Is she going to be okay? And they don't teach that in medical school. So if you don't have any kind of social skills, which most doctors don't, it can be really frustrating for patients, I think.
We ended up, so she was in the ICU for 10 days while they were like, we're going to monitor, to see if like brain activity, changes, stuff like that. And that's, as a person who's visiting every day, like that is the most stressful thing of your entire life. And then, it's a rotating series of doctors and nurses. And of course, this hospital is a teaching hospital. So they bring in all these like med patients in there. And so they keep, saying like, oh, and this, and then you are hearing their conversations of like, well, there's a 20% of this and da. And so we ended up getting this Russian doctor at the end, and his name was, I kid you not, Dr. Kremlin. And yeah, right. I'm like, is that your real name? Like, what's the deal? And so we ended up calling him Dr. Gremlins because he was just so like a pain in our ass. But I remember trying to ask a question. I said, if this was your mother, because we were talking about like, should it be time that we stop any kind of life-saving, moments, right? My sister and I have complete total control thanks to a medical,
power of attorney.
Yeah. And in fact, we got an interesting advice from our attorney like years ago. And he goes, listen, it's 60 pages long and you can fill out all the information you want, or you just designate someone and sign it, and that way they can interpret your wishes. Have a super awkward lunch where you sit down and say like, listen, if I lose both of my arms in an accident, I don't think life is worth living, so no drastic measures. Versus like, if you fill it out, they have to follow that exactly.
Every line, right.
So we've got full, carte blanche to do with my mom whatever we want. And I asked him, like, if this was your mom, what would you do? And he goes, she's never going to wipe her own butt. And I was like, what? He's like, she never wipe her own butt.
Yeah.
And I was just like, get the fuck out of this room. Like, you just, I don't even have time for you right now. If that is what your opinion is of going forward with my mother's care, is that's going to happen.
That was his way of, like, his awkward, like, scientific way of saying, she's probably not going to be the woman you ever knew her to be again.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
he couldn't
exactly.
use those words. And whether it's a second language issue or what, but those are the things, like, some doctors will seize on that stuff. Like, well, she's never going to wipe her own butt again. Or, well, you're going to have to feed her porridge for the rest of her life. It's like, that's not what I'm talking about at all here. Come on.
And I get where he's coming. And that's the thing too, right? I get where you're coming from, but could we not talk about my mom wiping her butt right now? Like, there are other things, like, be like, she'll never be able to feed herself again. Right. That to me says, oh, that's not the quality of life my mom wants. But I never talked to her directly about how she would feel about having someone wipe her ass.
Right.
Like I don't have a frame of reference
Yeah.
for what that is. But
Mom, back to front to back. What do you
yeah,
prefer?
exactly. Exactly. Does it matter if it's a male or female or
Wait, what are we talking about brand loyalty as far as toilet paper goes?
yeah, that's true, right?
Yeah.
How
What's
many
available?
times a day? And so it was one of those weird situations where like every single person, with the exception of the like 2 nurses we interacted with, were tough to be around. Also, my mom is in the ICU, and in the other ICU that's next to us, there had been a horrible school bus accident. And it was a foggy morning, and this woman who was driving the bus pulled it out onto a highway, got hit by a semi. They had to use the jaws of life to get her out, and they had to amputate her legs. And so you've, I'm sure, heard these screams 1,000 times, but for us, hearing the screams of someone having the phantom pain in their legs was just unsettling to anything. And that woman unfortunately ended up passing away, but hearing her, like, essentially the conversation where they've got to tell her that her legs are gone, and she's just screaming like, I can feel it, I can feel it, I can feel it. Oof, yikes.
Yeah.
I mean, is it hard to shrug that off at the end of the day? Like when you see something that is intense trauma? I
think it affects you more than you realize. So you develop coping mechanisms with it, and you have to deal with it. I mean, I worked, what is today? Saturday. I worked Thursday, and there was a pretty bad accident that day. Bad. And yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. I think I would say it's not easy to shrug it off. And if it's too easy to shrug it off, then it's probably time to stop. The guy who trained me, who I love and great doctor, said, if there's a bus accident and people are injured and some of them are children, and you don't go home and cry a little bit, then it's probably time to think about retiring, because that should affect you. There should be some effect there. We're all still human, and you have to get through it at the moment. You have to shrug it off because you need to provide the care that they need to make sure that they're going to live. But yeah, I think there's some of that at the end of the day where you go home and it can be difficult.
What's this last year been like?
It's funny. It's been like peaks and valleys. When it first started, I remember seeing the first person that we thought had COVID. There had been an outbreak in Italy, and this woman flew back to our little town in Maryland, and she decided that she wanted to go to Italy. And she flew back from Italy, and she had a fever and body aches and sore throat. And, like you asked the question, like, so like there's this big outbreak of this pandemic nobody really knows about. Why did you decide to go to Italy? It was my honeymoon. We booked this 6 months ago. I didn't know that this was going to be going on, and I got to go on my honeymoon. So they went, and she ended up not having COVID. She had the flu, but it was like, I remember she was the first one. I was like, all right, we got to put her in this room where the air goes up and out and not out into the department. And she has to be wrapped up in this, we all have to be wrapped up in this PPE, and we have to, all right, how are we going to do this? And then figuring that out and going along, and then just being completely overwhelmed with people that you were putting on ventilators and people that you were putting in ICUs and the hospital filling. And we converted our basement to a brand new ICU with all these beds and filling that up, and, trying to have some hope for vaccines, and we're getting better. And then, the Delta variant comes back, and it's like, oh my God, you just want to get through it, and initially it was invigorating. I mean, I remember people saying, doesn't this scare you? Like, how can you do this? You don't even know what's coming. And it's like, there are a certain subset of people who do what I do that, like, this is why we do it. Like, yeah, I see people with runny noses, and I see people who sprain their ankle, or I see people who need some stitches in their chin, but like, we train for disasters and pandemics, and this is what we do. And we step up and want to do that. And so it was at that point, it was like, I'm ready for this. This is what I've been training my whole life for. I'm ready. And you get through those first 6 months, and it's like, okay, how much longer is this going to go on? And you start to go, all right, what are we going to do to make this better? Okay, vaccines. We're going to do vaccines. And it's like, people aren't getting their vaccines. It's like, okay, well, now we're going to have another run at this, and it's coming back. And it's like, it can be a little tiring the second time around.
I think, when you think back to like March of 2020, and we thought like, oh, it's going to be a long 3 weeks, right? Like, oh boy, here we go.
Well, we set up all these tents outside, and we're going to see people away from the hospital so we can keep the sickest of the sick in the hospital, and just the run of the mill stuff outside. We're going to do that for a couple of weeks. And that was March, and they took the tents down in like December.
Yeah. Is that amazing?
Yeah. So it was 2020 I keep thinking, well, I did that a year ago. It's like, no, it was like 3 years ago, because I just lost basically from February of 2020 right into, spring of this year, where it was just almost a lost year, because it was great. There were parts of that situation I loved, because all my kids came home and they were home and they couldn't go out and hang out with their friends. Right. So it was really, that part of it was cool. Like as a dad, I really loved that. And so that was a lot of comfort for me, because, my oldest son is out of college and he's working, but his company wanted him to work from home. So he came to my house, and then my other two were in college and they ended up coming home. And I remember thinking, like, at the time, it was, again, like, if you go back to that time, my wife called me. I was at the hospital. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And she was like, I need you to go to Walmart and get some groceries. I was like, okay, what do you need? I need 8 dozen eggs. I need 6 loaves of bread. And I was like, what is going on? Like, University of Maryland's shutting down, and Luke's coming home, and Kieran's probably going to come home too, because they're going to shut his office down, and everybody's going to be here. We need all this food. And I went to Walmart, and this is like right at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was like 12:30 at night, and I was the only one in there. And the place was stocked. And so I'm buying all this food, and these people are looking at me like, what are you doing? Why are you stocking up all this food? I was like, my wife wants all this stuff. So I go and buy it. And the next day, my wife said, well, we forgot this. Like the next day. So she sends my daughter to Walmart, and my daughter turns around and comes home. She's like, shelves are empty. Like, people in 24 hours, it went from everything's fine to there's no toilet paper.
Yeah.
There are no eggs. There's no bread. It's like, okay, well, it'll be fine for a month. We'll get through this. We're stocked up. We'll be fine. And then you're like, okay, it'll be okay for a couple months. We'll be fine by 4th of July, Labor Day, Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It's like, geez.
You would have thought that by the 4th of July of last year, we'd realize, like, we should stop putting dates out there.
Right.
It's sort of like
Yeah.
the commitment phobic boyfriend. And when he's going to propose to the girl, like,
Right.
she's like, it's been 3 years. And if I don't have a ring on this thing by your birthday, he's like, oh, like that birthday passes. Like, oh, I got a new job and I got to get, save up some money for some rings. And does she like dolphins or elephants? I can't remember.
Would you settle for an onion ring?
That's the girl for me.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, oh, sure. That sounds good. What about when people start doing the like, lawns with the, like, thank you to the doctors and nurses and hospital staff.
Very nice.
Did that actually, like, invigorate you? Like if you were on your way to the hospital and you'd already worked a ton that week and, like, you saw something like that, did it lift your spirits?
I mean, certainly it's something that's very positive, and I enjoyed seeing that. And so, yeah, a little bit, but it's also, for me, it also went back to, I was a little embarrassed by it, just because, I mean, again, I really have always felt like that's what I trained to do. And, like, I chose this profession. I chose emergency. I chose disaster kind of stuff for just this time. And so I was a little embarrassed by it. I thought it was heartfelt, and I was really appreciative of it. So I don't want that to come across the wrong way, but I've always felt like there's a privilege to what I do. And like, we talk a lot about privilege now. It's a big thing. It's a big buzzword. And I think it's accurate, because it's like, I'm a doctor, man. I'm not the guy who's, who they needed to think? They need to think the guy who's pushing the broom, the guy who's cleaning the room behind me, the guy who's emptying the garbage cans, those guys, the people who come in are making food at the hospital. They didn't sign up for this.
Right.
Like, so when they talk about heroes, in my mind, I was always like, that's your hero right there. That guy who's going into that room where somebody had COVID, and he's washing the bed and he's washing the floor. That's the guy I need. If he's not here, we don't have any of this. And so I was always very taken by the outpouring of emotion from people. I thought that was great. A little uncomfortable with it just for those reasons. But yeah, it was appreciated.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it changed the way that we look at the medical field. I wouldn't be surprised if in 18 years from now, there is a huge number of people who've gone into, who want to be doctors, who want to be nurses, who want to be epidemiologists, like all of a sudden there's going to be this huge swell of these individuals because they saw how important and how, I hate using the word essential with that, but like, because you sort of be like, well, it is essential, but so is, my garbage collection,
right.
Like these are all things that are essential to, my daily life that I took for granted at times. But I think it is pretty interesting. Now, myself personally, I have a little bit of a problem where, like, you're celebrating these people and it's great. And then you decide, like, I'm not going to get a vaccine.
Right.
And you're like, well, and I get, I'm showing my hand a little bit there when it comes to, what I think. And I just go like, I can't do this again. Like, I can't spend a Thanksgiving where it's just my wife and I.
There's some part of me that really, like, this week, I think I even might have texted Kevin, like, you know, I don't know, so we're talking about vaccines. We're going to go right there. But like the first two people I saw the last time I worked, my husband and wife combo, both exposed to COVID, both getting really sick from COVID, neither one of them vaccinated. And like prime candidates, they should have gotten vaccinated. Now they're getting hospitalized. And it's like, you didn't trust the science of the vaccine, but now we're trusting science to save your life from this. And it's tough because it goes back to, it's a slippery slope in medicine. The guy who's got emphysema or heart disease and continues to smoke, like, okay, these things, people make bad decisions, but this one just seems like such a no-brainer where it's get the vaccine and you'll be safer. People say, oh, you're still going to get sick. You could get sick, but you're not going to be in the hospital. Like you might get cold symptoms, but you're not going to end up in a ventilator. You're not going to end up, requiring oxygen and, being in the hospital for weeks or months. And that when you're talking about making that second trip around, yeah, man, that's a little exhausting.
Yeah. I think we pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps and we got through, this like 15 months of just uncertainty and a horrific situation. And it's like, I know I don't have that in me again. We found ways, like even on this podcast, to thrive during that time. It forced us to say, okay, how can we continue doing this show? Like we never missed a single episode of this show during that time. But that's because Tucker did a ton of research into how we could do a virtual studio. Yeah. How can I mail you a microphone you can plug into your computer? Like how can we do this with people who don't have microphones? And I'm very grateful to him for that. But like, man alive, looking someone in the eye, like right now, our conversation is because I can see you is drastically different than if I can't. And I need human exposure. I remember thinking one night being like, God, what I would give to hug someone from high school whose name I don't really fully remember. Yeah. Hey, dude. Yeah. And then, and I'm like, that's all I want right now.
It's funny. Like even just like since I've been here, so I came to Fargo and I haven't really shaken somebody's hand in almost 2 years. Like on the East Coast, you're not touching. People don't touch each other. We are already a surly bunch on the East Coast, right? But people, you don't shake hands. Like you might fist bump, but you're not like nobody's touching each other, which is tough. I mean, you're right. It's
unless it's in Philly after a big game, then they're touching each other like crazy.
You're punching each other in the face and lighting couches on fire. But that need for human contact and intimate contact and just being out like that, it was very cathartic. I don't know how you guys felt about it. Like, but when the restaurants opened back up and you could just sit there and you're like, there's other people here.
Yeah.
You're outside and that's great. Who cares? We're here and they're bringing me food and there's other people and we're happy and I can hear voices. And I mean, that was great.
My wife and I love to cook, but knowing that I don't have to cook and don't have to do the dishes and unlimited fountain soda. Yeah. That first meal out there. I mean, honest to God, I didn't even want to talk with Jill. I just wanted to sit there and just exist.
Yeah. Soak it in. It was, watching other people, the happiness in other people. You could see everybody was that way. Like the first time we went to a restaurant, you're a little tentative and we go in one of the local places built this huge outdoor dining area. It was all picnic benches and everybody was at least 10 feet away. But you could see your people that you knew from your town and they were there and it was like, hey, you're not hugging or doing it, but it's like you watch them and just everybody just absorbing the ambiance and just, we're a community, man. We can be out again. Like, we're not just shut into one place where we are just in fear of just going to the grocery store and coming back. And and that kind of makes me think about like when you're talking about Googling your medical symptoms. I mean, as a total science geek, which is really at base what I am, like when the vaccine came out, when I did research and I did it, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like they've been working on this mRNA stuff since the 90s. And so I thought, this is it, baby. This is like the future of medicine. I cannot wait for this. I'm going to be first in line to get this vaccine because it is the coolest thing ever and it's going to work and we're all going to be happy and vaccinated and everything's going to be open again and it's going to be over. And I never contemplated that people would go, well, that was kind of fast. How'd they get that so quickly? Are we sure? I'm sure the Chinese didn't give, you get all these excuses of people who are rightfully a little concerned about where the vaccine came from. But at the heart of it, it's like, this is a modern medical miracle. Like that's how I'm looking at it. And the idea that it's like, the Chinese are trying to poison us. The government wants to track us. It's like all the excuses that people have come up with are the concerns. Let's call them concerns. are amazing to me.
Sure.
Well, so, look, hearts and minds, right? You're trying to win hearts of people
Yeah.
and get them to realize that, look, I acknowledge this concern you have. Let's talk about why you have that concern. But what I found with a lot of people is if it's one thing, if you can address that one thing, then they find another thing and they might find another thing. You just have, it seems like a hardcore group of people who aren't going to get vaccinated.
It's a culture war. That's what it is. It's a culture war. That's the only place that comes from. It's the only place that comes from because, if that culture war wasn't going on, where there was some sort of gamesmanship in public eye, where people can score points for some reason and rally around some kind of a cause, no matter how silly it might be, that's where it comes from. So I understand what you're saying as far as like, wanting to get along with people, but I'm also emotionally in a point in this pandemic where I'm kind of beyond that now, where I want to gain some of my empathy back for people I disagree with, and over time I will. Right now I don't have it because I had I had an aunt and a cousin who almost died from COVID who were hospitalized with it, right? So it's like, I understand where they may get their misinformation from, but I no longer am going to give them my patience. I just can't.
And that empathy fatigue, I think, it's going to grow. It's going to grow. And the issue that kills me about the whole thing, like with the lack of mandates and things, is we have a responsibility to society. Like, you may have an individual thought about how you want this to play out, but at the end of the day, if you want things to be normal again, this is the way to get it back to normal.
Right.
And your like personal experience with that is what brings you to that. And the amazing thing to me is when you'll meet people, like I'll see people, and I'll be like, we got to get vaccinated in 30 days. I'm not getting that vaccine. It's like, you are here on oxygen in the hospital, and what could you possibly still not understand about this?
Right.
Like, it's not I'm not used to this politicization of science that we have. I mean, you want to talk about Soviet? I mean, that's a Soviet thing. Like that's that is a manipulation. That's propaganda. That's, like you said, scoring points to get followers, to get people to believe you, to get people to send you money, whatever your motivation is. That is really a detriment to society.
Right.
Let me ask you this. This is going to be a hard left, but follow my direction.
Okay.
Do you ever watch any classic Saturday Night Live? Like
Yes.
first couple years? Do you remember the episode where Steve Martin hosts and it was like Frampton, the barber, and it was the medieval barber, but he was the barber, but he also did the medicine in town. Yes. And so everything was bloodletting for him.
Yes.
Let's
suck some blood.
Like Bill Murray goes, I was at the feast of the vernal equinox and I fell underneath an ox cart and my legs are all mangled. And he goes, all right, well, let's take about 4 pints. And he goes, yeah, I'm already bleeding. Hey, who's the barber here? I think about that and I'm like, to me, that speaks volumes for today, right? Like we're getting some people are getting their medical knowledge. I saw a great meme the other day where it's this guy leaning back from his computer. He goes, hey, honey, I found a website that the scientists and doctors couldn't find. And thinking about just like, who they've come up with experts. And we are allowing, even in the WebMD idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so, I wiped my butt and there's a little bit of blood, I'm going to go to WebMD rather than I've got a doctor. I should go to them. If you have insurance, I should say, if you have a medical plan that allows you to go to your doctor freely, because if you're paying out of pocket, holy shit, I understand why you're Googling it right now. But you go on that thing and it's like cancer. We've got a thing in Fargo called Ask a Nurse where you can follow and talk to a nurse. And so a lot of, first time parents will use it to say like, oh, there's a green fluid. And I always make fun of people who say like, I called Ask a Nurse and they said, just come into the hospital. And I'm like, did they tell you that it could be cancer? And I'm like, yeah, they did. And it doesn't matter what you call in with because they can't give you, they can't see it. They're not there. And they're like, well, yeah, it could be a lot of things. Well, I saw it could be rectal cancer. Yeah, it could be. You should probably come in and see a doctor.
Yeah.
Just do that. Just get it over and done with and come in and see a physician.
Yeah.
And I always get I don't know why that gives me such a weird, like perverse joy. Like when someone's like, yeah, I called Ask a Nurse. It's even worse than I thought about. And I'm like, it probably isn't. You probably have a hemorrhoid.
Yeah.
So
probably going to be okay.
Yeah. Right.
You could probably wait till the morning, but
yeah, you don't need to go to the ER right now. Walk in holding your rump, being like, doctor.
Look, people will bring that toilet paper with them, by the way.
Will they?
Oh, sure.
So
if they haven't already put it in the bowl, it's like they're looking, they're like, oh, that's not right. You want to see? How many times people say to me,
into the right pocket?
Do you want to see that Not really. I believe you. Or they'll take pictures, a lot of pictures.
I saw like a great like TED Talk years ago where a doctor was talking about like, listen, a human body is a lot like a car. I'm the mechanic, right? I know all the aspects of your car and I can help you fix it. Cars will also warn you when there's something wrong, just the same way your body will warn you. He goes, occasionally your transmission will just go out randomly, like a heart attack or a stroke that no one saw coming. But if your car's been whining for the last 10,000 miles and it throws like a belt, he goes, that's not a surprise. That's been warning you for 3 months. If you can't feel your feet and you're diabetic, that's a warning sign and you just chose to ignore it. And he goes, and just like a car will rust away or the bumper will fall off, your body will do that too before it decides it's going to shut down and not work anymore. And he's
What a
going
great
through
talk.
this. I know he was going through it. And I'm like, this guy is spot on. And he goes, and just because you've seen an episode of Top Gear doesn't mean you're a mechanic. and so I was thinking back to like, I loved the show House MD. I got a real kick out of that show when it was on. I'm
Lupus.
a huge, right, exactly. Like it's never lupus and it's never heavy metals. Why are we even testing for them anymore? That's never the plot line of the show. But it's one of those things where I bet people come in all the time and they give you their diagnosis first.
Yeah, and sometimes they don't, or they'll kind of play around with it. They'll tell you what's going on, and they clearly have a concern. And I've just gotten to the point where I say, "What are we worried about? Like, did you Google something? Have you looked something up? Let's make sure, and just make sure to address it." Well, because again, it goes back to what are they looking for? They want somebody to tell them they don't have cancer. They want somebody to tell them they're going to wake up tomorrow morning and be fine to go see their doctor. I mean, that's what they're looking for. A lot of times they want reassurance and they want to know that they're not going to die in the next 6 hours.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times addressing exactly what their concern is can be very, it alleviates a lot of their concerns and fears and makes them happy. So,
Have you ever heard of the comedian Patton Oswalt?
yeah, of course.
Okay, so I love Patton Oswalt, and he wrote a book called like Spaceships, Pizza, something,
Zombie,
zombies,
Shark or
werewolves,
something.
yeah, something like that. And in it, he's got 3 chapters about his grandmother explaining something, Grandma Rumfola. And if you listen to his audiobook version, he kind of performs it, and it's like, my grandmother gave me a Styx cassette tape or container with a Doors cassette in it for my birthday. And it's like, Grandma Rumfola, what's this? Well, your cousin Eric, and then she goes through this huge long story. It's like, so what I'm trying to say is I was visiting Eric and there was a garage sale next door and they had tapes, 2 for $5. And I said, 2 for $5? That's so much money. So I didn't buy any tapes and I left, but I thought, oh, I bet he would like a tape. So I started looking around and seeing if I could find a tape. And then I was going to buy you a Star Wars and I couldn't find one of those. And so I went back to that garage sale, but they had already closed up for the night. And I knocked on the door and said, do you have any of those cassette tapes left? And they said, no, we sold out. And I said, do you know of another garage sale that's got, and just, it goes on and on and on. He goes, so long story short, I was at the auto dealership the other day. And like, it's amazing. And I imagine that you encounter a patient on a regular who comes in and it's like, okay, so what's going on with your knee? Well, the thing is that in 1964, I fell in love with a man named Leroy.
100%. It's 100%. Because I try not to be rude or anxious about it, but it's always kind of like, and I have a partner who does this. What's your emergency today?
Oh,
because we're in the emergency department. So what's your emergency today? I just kind of say, what brings you in today? Like, what's going on? And you'll get that. Well, in 72, I was in Nam, right? And sir, it says you have abdominal pain. I'm getting there. I'll get there. And it's hard because, there's a lot of people coming in, a lot of people shaking. So you kind of have to really redirect people. But yeah, on the regular, you get people who are, yeah.
Does anyone just say like, all right, what's broke?
Yeah. Oh,
That
sure.
too?
Yeah. The best patients are the ones that come in and go, I've got this and this is what happened. It's like, thank you. That was great.
There have been a few times in my life where I've gone to the ER for something that I thought might be happening. A few of those times when it turned out that, yep, it's not going to be anything bad, I can tell like how annoyed I've made the doctor on staff just because I was there. And I feel bad immediately. And it's made me kind of question sometimes, like, should I go in for this or not? My throat is closing up, but I think maybe I should. Okay, I'll go in. And then
that's the challenge. Like, I think it really depends on where you are in your career. So I've been doing this for 20 years. And so sort of early on where I was like, yeah, I'm going to be living the ER life. This is going to be great. And somebody come in with a sore throat and I oh, this guy's got a sore throat. But now it's like, like I like people. I want people to come in. So I don't mind, like, I've gotten to the point where my job is not necessarily always to save lives and cure emergencies. If you're worried your throat's closing, that's why I'm there. Come in, see me. We'll reassure you. We'll take a look, make sure we're addressing all your concerns, make sure you're happy, and you will live for the next 24 hours if you leave me. Right. And I think you get people at varying stages of their careers who don't have a good handle on what we actually do. Like, my life is not like the ER TV show at all. Like, most of my life is, I hurt my ankle, I got a sore throat, which is great. I love it. I love what I do. And the pandemic has changed that a little bit, but,
what about Grey's Anatomy? Is it anything like Grey's Anatomy?
I stopped watching that after like 2 episodes because it was so unrealistic.
Because
I've seen one episode where apparently someone had a bomb in their stomach.
Yep. I was just about to say that. It was in his chest because they were doing World War II reenactments or something, and they thought that the bazooka was not loaded, and then it shot into his chest
and didn't blow up.
Didn't blow up, but then Christina Ricci had her hand in the guy's body and was like actually holding the pin closed or something. And it was this whole thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only show that I would ever recommend people, they want to know exactly what life's like in a hospital, is Scrubs.
Really?
100%. Like, it is.
So do you see yourself as a John McGinley?
So, it's funny. Like, that show started 1 year after I became a doctor. And so JD basically, like, I finished my intern year as he started his intern year.
Yeah.
And we started watching it, and I was like, this is like, literally almost everything that happened to him, hiding from a code, hiding from patients, people dying, like romances in the hospital that weren't really romances, like all that stuff, 100% real. There's not anything that I see on that show that I go, that would never happen.
What about General Hospital?
It's a little less sex in the real hospital than the general hospital.
Really? I would assume there's more. Okay, so I don't often get to talk to someone in the medical field where you're dealing with emergencies, so you can choose to answer this next question or not.
Okay.
What's the weirdest thing you've ever pulled out of a butt?
I get this question a lot.
Do you really?
I do. People ask me this all the time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, weird.
What's your favorite thing?
Because, okay, so for example, I had a great uncle who was out in the field behind their house in their farmhouse.
He slipped and fell
Backwards onto like a tree stump that had been and essentially prolapsed his anus, and he crawled back to the house.
Didn't call an ambulance, drove himself to the hospital.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because he's a farmer, right?
Yep, exactly. And it was like, Arlene, I think we need to go to the hospital.
Part of my rectum's on the tree over there. I will tell you that the only thing that scares me in the ER is when I walk in, I'm talking to a guy and I say, what do you do for a living? They say, I'm a farmer. Because farmers don't go to the hospital. It's like, immediately it's like, I need every nurse in here right now, because if this guy's a farmer, he's sick.
This is a disease we haven't treated since
probably got probably has
colonial
duct
age.
tape on his body somewhere.
Right,
Somewhere on his body is duct tape.
Yes. So in terms of like people, it's amazing what people will put up there. I haven't seen a lot of it. I saw a lot of it in training. Like, I trained in Indianapolis and in the Midwest. No offense to anybody who's listening from the Midwest, they seem to put a lot more things in.
Yeah.
Than I've seen on the East Coast. And I've seen a little bit on the East Coast.
It's because we pretend we're so repressed out here, but really we're not. But we don't want to go and buy, like, if it's something for sexual pleasure, we would never buy that particular device. We'd look at it and be like, okay, well, that sort of looks like, like a channel lock.
I could probably make that with, I had a guy, there are two guys that I'll tell you stories in residency that I saw. The first guy, this nurse comes and goes, you got to go see this guy. It says elbow pain. She's like, it's not elbow pain. So I go in to see the guy. I said, what brings you in today? And he goes, well, I'll tell you right up. I didn't want to come in, but my girlfriend and I are having sex, and she's tickling my prostrate with this vibrator, and it snuck up my butt. I was like, your girlfriend? Okay. And he's there by himself. So we're like, okay, no problem. So let's get going through taking the whole history. And then at the end I go, so is it still on? And he gets this look on his face. He's like, yep, still on. Still on. So I'm examining him and I'm like push on his butt. It's like, yeah, there it is. I can feel it. Yeah. So we pulled that out. We sedated him, and you kind of use this technique that you have to fish things out, I guess. And you use a little tube that usually goes into the bladder and you sneak it up past it and you blow the balloon up and you sort of pull it out. So we pull it out and we sedate this guy. And very nice guy, but the nurse.
So it's like when I clean my dryer vent. Like I get it in
like
there
the
and then I
brush.
just whatever comes out
comes out. Yeah, you got to be careful with it. And so I remember thinking, this poor guy. I don't care if he doesn't have a girlfriend, if he's whatever. And so at the end of it, where he's getting ready to go home, he had to wait because he'd been sedated. And his girlfriend shows up. She's like, I'm so sorry this happened. And we were all like, he was telling the truth. It really was his girlfriend. And then I had a guy.
Did you give him the thing back?
No, that went in the garbage.
Okay. See, that'd be a question of mine right off the bat, too.
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, some of this is expensive.
Yeah. We just threw that one
I mean,
away.
some people keep their tonsils, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
People don't get to keep things anymore, right? Like it's medical
No.
waste.
Yeah, it's medical waste. Yeah. Or pathologists have to.
I
That wasn't at the hospital probably. The pathologist usually has to look at it, make sure there's no cancer.
I remember thinking like I had a friend who had his appendix out, and I'm like, cool, now you get a jar with your appendix in it. And they're like, no, they had to throw it away. And I thought, what a waste.
I had a guy who came in who decided he wanted to put a safety pin in his urethra.
Oh,
The tube in the penis.
Yeah.
So and this is like, I didn't know this. This is like a whole thing where it's a sexual thing for some guys.
Yeah.
I'll never be a doctor.
It's called sounding. So there's guys, and so I mean, you can Google that and everybody's like, sounding, what's that? Yeah. And he put it in, and so he put it in with the part that's rounded. He put that down in, and then he went to try to pull it out, and when he tried to pull it out, it opened up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was, and I said to him, he was an older guy. He was like almost 60, and his wife had gone out of town. I said, and that's one of those like, so what made you do that? Like, what were you thinking? Because I don't mind asking people, like, what were you thinking when we did this? Like this thing that brings you to the emergency department. What right before this happened? What went through your head? And he was like, this was just an experiment gone horribly awry.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, that's. He said, I'm probably not going to do this again. I said, that's
Probably.
That's good. I do have. There's a guy that I see locally that sounds, and he comes in a lot with. He gets infected. He gets infection.
Yeah, I can imagine.
He has any number. There are any number of things you can get on the internet that are shaped properly, and so like metal tubes and things.
Yeah,
we also
and
had a guy
not barbed, and so it's. I mean,
Right.
people
Slides
have
in and
found
out.
the things that are. Yeah.
we had a guy in Indiana who liked to put toothbrushes in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would, and he was a prisoner, and so
I'm
he
in
would
so
do
much
it.
pain.
He would do it so that he didn't have to come. He could leave the prison, and it got to the point where he wasn't putting him in far enough, so he would just keep pushing him farther and farther.
No.
Yeah, and
God damn it.
bristled toothbrush. Yeah, bristled toothbrushes.
Do you ever see the movie Doc? Well, yeah, of course, Doc Hollywood.
Sure.
So Doc Hollywood is one of my favorite movies to watch. And I love how, it's this 50-50 thing, right? Like he is a great doctor, for what he does. And he brings that expertise to the small town, but also he learns how little he knows about it. Like when he's about to, do bowel surgery on that little boy.
Yeah,
And it turns out
he
he'd
needs
been
a Coke.
eating.
Yeah.
He just needs a Coke because he's been eating, essentially eating
Chewing
tobacco.
Yeah.
But when they're doing the montage of him like reading the letters to the people who don't know how to read, and there's one where he goes up in that little kid's ear and he pulls out and he goes, what is that? Like a Camaro? And the like older brother takes off because clearly the older brother is the one who had shoved this in his brother's ear.
Those kind of things are like, I pulled a Lego out of a kid's nose the other day. Those are great because the kid freaks out and you pull it out and then he's like, and like reaching, he wants his Lego back. He goes, I'm not giving you this back. You just put it in your nose. You can't have this back.
That was my grandfather's Lego.
Yeah. All right. Gotta hang on to that.
Are we doing a lot with eye patches these days? I feel like eye patches were a really common thing, and then all of a sudden, like, have we advanced beyond an eye patch?
You mean like for trauma, like for injuries, or just in life in general?
In general, like I feel like more people used to wear eye
I
patches.
think we've advanced.
Yeah.
I think there's been some eye advances.
Too bad for the companies who made eye patches,
I
right?
know.
Like they're like, God, there's barely any old school pirates left.
Yep. And who's going to wear these patches? Yeah.
Do you know one of the reasons pirates wore eye patches? So this is a true fact. It's so when they would go below deck, they would have low light vision in one of their
Immediately.
eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's genius.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then some of them had horribly mangled like eyes because if you have a parrot right there all the time, they're gonna peck at something.
And the softest piece goes first.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
tasty. Grape-like.
Okay, here's another question. So this is going to get real advanced about your eyes.
Okay.
So I'm told that when I'm looking, I'm actually seeing this upside down, but my brain's putting it right back. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's combining both sides to be one, one vision, right?
Yes.
That's what way if you get double vision, it really weirds people out for that.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to get my eye where one of them popped out of my head and was looking down and looking forward, would my brain go completely nuts because it can't mash those things together, or would it look? How would that look?
You would see two different things. Yeah,
Really?
It's unlike double vision, where you just sort of might have a muscle issue, or you might see two of the same things. Your brain's seeing two completely different things. I've seen that. I've seen people that their eyes come out and
can you put an eye back in and be okay?
We don't do that in the ER.
Right.
They have to. Yeah.
But like if that happens, that's where I'm going is the ER. I'm not going to be like,
let's
go to my optometrist.
That's an emergency. Come to the hospital for that. Because there are muscles that have to get reattached and all that. But it's, yeah, it comes out. Yeah.
Earlier, you were talking about like when you were excited about reading about the mRNA and stuff, like the Moderna and everything else. So you were, the reason I'm asking this because you were talking about how nerdy medical professionals are, which would tell me that you're probably keeping up on a lot of the latest in research of different things. So is there something like a medical breakthrough that you think might be on the horizon 10, 20 years that you think is coming down the pike that you are really excited about that no one is really thinking about right now?
I think there's a lot of eye stuff that's coming that, like beyond just LASIK or implants, like the ability to have like almost like a bionic vision, like an implant that they can put in people's eyes that will allow them to see again. I think that's a big one. There was also an implant recently where a guy who was a quadriplegic, they like he's completely paralyzed. They would put an implant in his brain and he could feel his arm, which he hadn't done.
Really?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of neurologic stuff coming because we still don't know a lot about that. It's like once you become wheelchair bound or your spinal cord is severed, you're done. Like there's no way to regrow nerves, and they're figuring out ways around that. And one of the big areas is eyes, like being able to see again. Another
weird question. Did you ever get attached to any of your cadavers that you ever had to work on?
We only had one in medical school.
Because I was told that sometimes people end up with this weird attachment to it because it's given so much to you as far as knowledge that you almost like feel bad. And I've heard about people who will write letters, like if you donate your body to science to be that cadaver, and who will like write letters that go back with the family. So my wife's grandmother wanted the $50 that you could get during your lifetime. So she donated her body to science. So after she passed away, like the University of Nebraska showed up and they're like, well, we're here to pick up your grandmother. Everyone was like, wait, what? And they're like, oh yeah, 5 years ago, like, oh shit. And so what was interesting is they made her like an honorary doctor. She got an honorary like doctorate out of it. Wow. And they said she's finished teaching. So it's not like we're done cutting up your grandma, but like she's finished teaching. And so it got me into this thing, and like some people had written letters saying like, thank you so much for this thing. And like, I learned so much. And even though I never met her, when she was up and walking around, I do feel like, your grandmother's given me a gift that I've never known before.
What did you guys do for the funeral then? If her body wasn't neither cremated nor taken to the...
So that's the thing is that, the funeral home was the first one because they didn't want her fully embalmed and everything like that. So they put her, they put her in a freezing container. We have the funeral, and then everything just pauses while the body is taken. And then they sent her back cremated.
So they don't embalm. They inject the arteries and veins with a special latex, so that when you're doing the dissection, actually the arteries are red and the veins are blue. It's really fascinating. And it really, I think, depends on where you go to medical school. Like our medical school, my cadaver was named Irene. Like I still remember that, like 25 years later.
See, look at that.
There were only 2 women in the entire floor of medical school, 160 people in my class, 4 per cadaver, 40 cadavers, only 2 women. And so a lot of people had to come over, and we were very protective of like, all right, like don't touch Irene. You can look, we'll, if you need something, we'll touch. And then at the end, we wrote a letter to her family. We didn't know who they were. You could just we wrote this sort of generic letter, but then we had a funeral, we had a service.
Really?
Yes.
Very sweet.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like, cause I don't know if this is still how they do it anymore, because again, there's so much science to learn, but anatomy and physiology for a first year medical student, like when I did it, that was everything. And like you had anatomy every day for a couple hours and on Fridays for 6 hours. and you're in there like learning where everything goes and all the arteries and nerves and what it does and how to find it. And, it was a big deal. So, and it was, and that was, 25 years ago, but I still know her name, and we wrote a letter, and we had a service and like the whole 9 yards.
Well, that's very interesting, very unique. And it also, I think, kind of takes away the like creepiness of it, knowing that, you're not a slab of meat, right? Like you're not practicing tattooing on your grandmother to see like how the ink goes in.
Right. No, absolutely not. And it's, you do things, is that part of the education? I mean, it's like one of the first things you do. You walk into medical school the first day, like, welcome to medical school. Let's go see the cadavers. And you're like, really? Can we take notes first for a minute? And you would go, well, the first time you go in, their faces, hands, and feet are wrapped. So it takes away a little bit of the human aspect of it. Like it lets you sort of ease into it. So you're seeing like a chest, or you're seeing part of an arm, and it takes away a little bit of that. Like you're able to focus on that aspect of what you're doing, and then over time you have to unwrap the face, and you unwrap the hands and the feet, and you do all those. But it's not the first thing you do. Like you ease into it.
I always tell people the biggest lie that I've ever experienced that Hollywood gives is how easy it is to close somebody's eyelids after they've passed away. They make it seem like someone's died, and you just like casually drape your hand over a face and the eyelids close. And I remember, so both of my parents passed away in our home, right? Like my dad, who had been undergoing cancer, we heard that quote unquote death rattle. And so that day that happened, and I remember being like, someone's got to close his eyes. Like, could someone close his eyes? And like, we were trying, like it wasn't. And so someone's like, you got to massage him down. And so here we are, like, and I'm like, this is so messed up. Right,
it's like,
now,
like you used to see the old pictures of guys, they'd have coins on there.
Right. Exactly.
They
Right.
Stay closed.
Yeah. And then and he chose.
And that is very like, if you think about it, like a dead person with their eyes open, extremely different than a dead person with their eyes closed.
100%.
Yeah.
It goes from being unsettling, because then you're like, well, this is something different, versus at peace.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
It shows how much the eyes communicate life.
Absolutely.
I mean, even in the Pixar film WALL-E, which they actually have a really good example of it, because his eyes are just these two lenses, right? And they were able to animate a kind of light refraction or something in them when he's unconscious versus conscious, where it's this cue
Clear
of
difference.
Oh, there's life there now. There's something there. So yeah, when just my grandmother has a room full of porcelain dolls that she's made, and they all have these dead beady eyes. And whenever I'd visit her in Kentucky, I'd get the porcelain doll room, and so I just have all these dead eyes staring at me all the time. And
I'll sleep when I get home. Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, I always thought that scene too with the eyes thing that they do in movies. I'm surprised they still do it, because I feel like no matter how serious the movie is, if I'm in a movie and that happens, you get some chuckle from the audience, like, okay, we've seen this. We know this is movie BS. I feel like they should just stop doing that scene.
I'm going to disagree, because I think there's a third of the audience who actually know what it's like, who have been present with someone.
Right, and that's who I'm hearing the chuckle from, is that third that's sitting out there.
And then the other 2/3 of it are suspending disbelief of what they already know to be a part of it.
Sure.
Murphy, you look like you were going to make a point there.
No, I was just thinking that you have a group of people probably in the movie who are like, they're not dead. Their eyes are still open.
Yeah.
They can close their eyes.
It's weird. I mean, can you watch a movie where they've got medical stuff going on and be able to suspend your disbelief?
But
are you like 50 cc's of neonephrine?
The lighting wouldn't look like that in that room.
I used to do a lot of that. My wife would actually be like, could you stop? Like, watch the movie, suspend the disbelief. We can do this. And so, you just try to take it in for what it is.
Do you ever see the show 30 Rock?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yes. So Dr. Leo Spacimin is one of my favorite characters.
Spacimin.
And there's the episode where Alec Baldwin has a heart attack, and Leo comes into the waiting room to talk to Liz, and he's covered in blood. Like, he's wearing his white lab. So he's like, and they're looking, and they're shocked, and he's like, I was at a I was at a costume party, and he doesn't explain it. Right. And then like later on, he's like, it's dog's blood. I get such a kick out of that.
I always think of Arrested Development, and it looks like he's dead. It looks like he's dead, or it just looks like he's dead. He's covered in blue paint or something.
We've lost him. Oh God, yeah. We don't know where he is. And they get smarter as they go on. Like, I'm afraid he's blue. Like,
yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Murph, this has been great. Mike Murphy has been our guest. This has been so much fun chatting with you. And now you're on to this fun, like, road trip right after this. You're going to hit the open road.
Yeah. My first time in North Dakota, which I'm embarrassed to say at my age, but so far so good. Yeah, I can't wait.
Eat some lefse, some lutefisk. We got a lot of Norwegians, but you're going to actually be going into German territory here in a little bit, so you can get some Fleischkugel.
You're driving west is where you're going?
Yeah.
All right, it gets nice and flat.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Nice and flat.
Yeah. Have plenty of good JJ Meets World episodes to listen to while you go out there.
252 of them as of this episode.
There you go.
Wow.
Fantastic.
All right.
This has been so awesome. Thanks for being our guest.
Thank you.
That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. There's a really good episode of Law & Order with Hillary Duff that's about vaccines that if you haven't watched it yet, you really should.